In this video, I'd like to talk about the best of 2022, looking at some photographs that I've come across, as well as a selection of photo books. This is obviously a very subjective look, and it's by no means comprehensive. I've collected images in a few genres, and it might be interesting just to work through them and see why some images work better than others. Some of the images I've taken from competitions that were held this year, so it's possible that some of the images were actually taken last year. I'll start with a category that includes street photography and photojournalism. This image is just so human and silly. It contrasts our preoccupation with cell phones and the impermanent nature of experience compared with the antiquity of the Sphinx in the background. This is a beautifully composed image. Even though there's a lot of movement in the photograph, her face is perfectly in focus and there's a stillness about her. It has a very cinematic feel. You're immediately drawn into the drama of the photograph and you're thinking, where's this girl going? What is she thinking? Is she in danger? What is the backstory and what's going to happen next? This is another cinematic type photograph because if you look at it in isolation, you have no idea what is going on. The woman looking pensive, being driven around in a really old car by a guy who has his mask under his chin, and a scene behind which doesn't fit in with the foreground, which is beautifully flashed. It has the look of a paparazzi photograph getting a quick shot of a model or a film star. The bright red color of the car is really garish and decadent, standing out against the fairly bland background in sharp contrast. I find really strong wildlife images beautiful to look at, but it's not an area I've ever delved into. It's a very specialized field and it's getting more and more technical. If you don't put in the time in the field, then you're not going to get the shot. These last two photographs for me stand out because there's a story behind them. They go beyond the surface content. There's a mystery about them and one can make up a story about the circumstances that led to this moment. Now this is something that really stands out. This is Dmitry Kok, and he discovered polar bears living in an abandoned weather station in a place called Kolyukhin in Russia. And he used a low-noise drone in order to take these photographs. This essay has a beautiful otherworldly feel, and the expressions on the polar bears' faces are absolutely fantastic. These two images are from a minimalism contest, and I love the simplicity of the images. The second one shows the hands of a group of visitors to the Hungarian parliament. And it seems they went for a walkabout and then they were resting their hands on a railing. These next 7 news images could well be contenders for next year's World Press Photo Awards. In these first 2 images, you can't help but be drawn to the facial expressions that really dominate the photograph. The obvious advantage that news photographers have is that dramatic events are happening. But the difficulty is to remain calm and to be able to think about how you're going to produce a strong image that stands out above the rest within these difficult circumstances. When the adrenaline is flowing, it's really difficult to focus on the subtleties, and in these photographs that I've chosen, it really is the subtleties that have made them strong. The lighting in this image is really complex. In this photograph, taken after the passing of the Queen, there's real contrast between the hairy, scarred arms of the man cradling the gentle portraits of the monarch. I chose just 2 landscapes for this video. The second is such a bizarre image. It was taken by Hajid Hojati. It shows a really lush landscape juxtaposed against a desert environment. It was taken near Kurd city in Iran. Here are 6 portraits that I really think engage the viewer's attention. In my mind, a portrait becomes successful when you get a sense of who the person is that's being photographed, but also you get a feeling of who the photographer is and how they're relating to the subject. I realize that I'm not crediting the individual photographers, and that's definitely not ideal. I found that putting the photographer's name over the photograph detracts from the photograph itself, and talking about each individual photographer makes the video too long. So I apologize to all the photographers whose images I've included. Architectural photography is another field that's become more and more demanding, and you can't just pitch up and take a nice picture of a building. In order to make an impact in this field, you really have to emphasize aspects that will spark the viewer's interest and entice them to explore the content of the images. In these 4 images, the photographers have added drama by focusing on visual factors like graphic impact, shape, tone, and textures, as well as movement and variations in lighting. I'll now move on to the photo book section of this video, and I've chosen 7 books to look at. This is the format in which photography really comes into its own. A great photo book can be hyperlinked in a myriad of ways. I haven't ranked them in any order. They each have appeal and are distinctive in their own way. This selection of photographs comes from a book called Another Country. The book is a rethink of British documentary photography spanning the time from the end of the Second World War until present day. The book is edited by Jerry Badger, who's a photographer himself. He's a writer on photography as well as a curator. Julie Blackman's Midwest Materials explores the seeming monotony of her generic American hometown of Springfield, Missouri. She constructs a bewitching fictitious world that is playful and ironic and menacing all at the same time. Her images have a painterly feel, and she says that she gained inspiration from the 17th century Dutch masters. She choreographs these disturbing scenes in order to explore the overwhelming and often conflicting expectations and obligations of parenthood. The next book is called Tom Sandberg, Photographs 1989 to 2006. It's a richly printed book with 124 images. Tom Sandberg is one of Norway's most important photographers, and he passed away in 2014. He spent decades focusing his camera on shapes and transforming the everyday into studies of stillness that radiate mystery. He was a master of light with a remarkable poetic vision. These rich prints are enigmatic, but they are based in the reality of the ordinary around us. Judith Joy Ross, Photographs 1978 to 2015, is a new retrospective publication of her work. As you page through the 200 portraits, one is struck by how each of these interactions has resulted in a meaningful encounter between the photographer and the sitter. Each person is observed as her equal, but also as an individual. There's something intangible that holds all these photographs together, but what it does reveal is the photographer's softness and sensitivity. Ross was strongly influenced by German photographer August Sander, how he photographed very straightforwardly, centering the person in the frame. Although, unlike Sander, who's been described as a bit of a taxidermist in his approach, Ross is without question a humanist. Odessa by Yelena Yemchuk. These photographs were taken only a few years ago in Ukraine's third largest city, Odessa. But now, because the city has been transformed by war, it adds a weird dimension to the book. You get that feeling that you're paging through the distant past. To a Western eye, life in the city looks slightly foreign, but also sort of ordinary. The images are loose and varied, but not stylized, which one might expect from a photographer who spent a lot of time within the fashion world. A lot of her subjects seem suspended in time, and one is left with the feeling of a loss of innocence, both within the time that she worked, but also now because one's aware of what has been lost because of the war. The Unseen Soul Letter. I'm not going to say much about him now because I want to do a full episode on his work. But if you're a fan like me, this is an essential book because you get the opportunity to see more of his richly colored poetic images. The last book that I'm going to look at is Some Say Ice by Alessandra Sanguinetti. The publication takes its name from the first line of a Robert Frost poem. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. Alessandra is a Magnum photographer who grew up in Buenos Aires and is now based in San Francisco. As a young girl in Argentina, she came across a 1973 publication called Wisconsin Death Trip. The book delved into the darker side of the American dream, and it's become a bit of a cult classic. At the time, the publication had a haunting effect on Sanguinetti, with its images of dead babies, women in mourning, and generally the tough life that the inhabitants of the Midwest lived. She eventually chose to photograph in the small town of Black River Falls in Wisconsin. I wouldn't describe her photographs as documentary. They speak more about the mood of melancholy. The book becomes somewhat of a Gothic mystery. She manages to instill an unsettling sense of frozen time. I feel that her publication lands up somewhere between the book that made such an impression on her youth and possibly something like the film Fargo. I'm sure I've left out many gems from the selection of 2022, but please let me know in the comments if you've had any favorites that I've missed. I'd be interested to hear from you. And thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.
Is it over yet?
Yes, it is good. It really is.
What are they?
Well,
and find out what the future holds in store.
Is it over yet?